You know as well as I do that the familiar cues around posture, sit up straight, shoulders down and back, keep a flat back, all of that, they don't work as well as we might like. They might work effectively in the short term, but the minute that you stop thinking about it, you end up right back in the same slumped posture. So one of the things that I want to share with you in this particular video is a way that you can actually build much better, much easier posture from the bottom up rather than from the top down. Because one of the things that becomes apparent when you spend some time in body awareness practices is that the body doesn't like having forced, rigid ideas kind of put onto it. Just the same way that you might not like being told what to do and how to do it, the body responds quite similarly. It can get a little rebellious at times if we start to force these ideas of proper posture onto it. So in this video, I'll walk you through a very simple practice you can use anytime you're seated, really, to help you get a lot better sense of what uprightness can feel like. So what you're going to need for this particular practice is a firm chair, stool, or bench to sit on. Something that's not too cushy, that's going to give you a solid amount of feedback underneath of you. So if you need to go get that, by all means, feel free to press pause. When you're ready, we can continue on with the video. Now, before I dive into the practice, I just want to make a quick note that if you are really interested in getting a sense of how you can use your body to sort out some of your mindset challenges or some of the psychological stuff that may be going on in the background, just go to bodymindclass.com and you'll find an in-depth presentation I made on how to use movement to address all sorts of challenges around self-image, personal development, that sort of thing. So again, it's bodymindclass.com. Now, for the time being, when you are seated on this chair, on this stool, whatever the case is, take a couple of moments and notice the sense of uprightness you have. Notice how tall you feel. Notice where it is you feel like you're having to work to maintain this position. In summary, you might notice where it is you feel that gravity is winning. Now, the places where gravity is winning are the places where you're going to find a lot of strain within yourself. Now, you don't need to change any of those things from the outset. You simply notice them, and we'll see how they change as we go through this particular practice. So, to begin, would you think about rocking the pelvis forward and then return to center? And would you do this many, many times? So you rock forward, you come to the center, you rock forward, come to the center, and maybe have just a moment to pause in between each repetition so that there's a clean break between this movement and the next movement. And that's going to help your nervous system learn a lot more easily. So you rock forward, you pause, you rock forward, you pause. And notice the way that most people do this when they start out is they rock the pelvis forward by driving the low back forward. And maybe you have a sense of that yourself. Maybe you find that when you're rocking the pelvis forward, it's a bit like you're contracting the musculature along the back in order to do so. Now, it's not good, it's not bad, it's not here, it's not there. It's a funny habit that a lot of people develop. So you might make a couple of movements deliberately doing that particular habit. You might squeeze the muscles of the low back to drive the pelvis forward, and then you let them go to rock back to the center. Now, that is pretty similar to the way that most people think to improve their posture. When they think sit up straight, they often engage in a lot of contraction along the back of the body. They squeeze the musculature along the back of the body to pull their shoulders down and back, they tuck their chin in, they sit up straight, all of this. And it's a lot of work through those muscles, right? So we'll see if there's something a little bit easier available to you instead. So for just a moment, would you pause and rest your hands along the crease of the hips. So if you have your hands resting on your thighs, your fingers are going to be pointed in toward the midline. And think about the muscles that are underneath of your hands right here. These are some of the deep hip flexors. These are some of the muscles that can really do us a lot of good in terms of organizing our posture if we know how to use them. Now, one of these you've probably heard of before. It's called the psoas. And it connects to actually a little point on the inside of your upper thigh. So along the femur, there's a little bony knob called the lesser trochanter. And if you have your fingers resting along your thighs, you might get a sense of where that is. It's going to be right underneath of your fingertips in this position. And it actually will attach from this point all the way up and around to the lumbar vertebrae in the low back. So it connects from these vertebrae over in front and across the pelvis into the deep inside part of the femur in this case. Now, the psoas is closely related to another muscle you might have heard of called the iliacus, which connects to this same point on the thigh, but it actually connects to the ridge of the pelvis as well. And these two muscles have a deep, deep influence on the folding of the hip, on the flexing of the hip. Now, another muscle, just for a reference here, would be the rectus femoris, which connects to the front bony part of the pelvis. You can get a sense of that yourself as well. And it'll connect down toward the knee, down toward the bottom of the femur. So these muscles together go a long way in terms of folding the hip, reducing the distance from the femur to the torso, essentially. So for a couple of moments, will you make a specific movement of rocking your pelvis forward, but do so by contracting those hip flexors. See if rather than drive the pelvis forward from the contraction of the tissues of the low back, see if you can pull the pelvis forward by contracting those deep hip flexors. Now, as you do this a couple of times, another cue you might think of is sending your pubic bone, that bony ridge at the front of the pelvis. If you send that down and into the supporting surface beneath you, it might be another way to think of it. So if you make a couple of movements this way, you then have a bit of a reference point, and you can compare this to what it's like to drive the pelvis forward by contracting the muscles around the low back. So have a go of it one way and then the other way. One time you drive the pelvis forward with the low back. The next time you pull the pelvis forward with the hip flexors. And if you compare one and the other, you might find that one of them is actually much more comfortable. What we tend to find is that if you can organize the movement of the spine, if you can organize your upright posture through an intelligent use of these deep hip flexors, it takes a lot less energy, and it's a lot less of a strain on your back over the course of the day. So again, maybe just a couple more movements, a couple of repetitions to give your body a chance to really process what's going on here. And then pause for a moment. Simply rest, sit upright as you normally would without doing much of anything in particular. And see if there's some change in what you're aware of about your sense of uprightness. Even compared to just a few minutes ago, is there some change in the sense of length you feel along the spine? Is there some change in the amount of work that's required to keep you upright? Is there some change in where it feels that gravity is winning? Now, this is just a simple little thing, but it's something you can keep in mind anytime you are commuting on the subway, anytime you got to sit at the desk for a long period of time, anytime you're out and about at a restaurant, whatever the case is, wherever it is that you might be concerned about what your posture is like, rather than contracting through the back in order to do so, you might let the muscles a little nearer to your source of support actually do some of the work for you. And if you think of rolling the pelvis forward through an action of the deep hip flexors, that might let you find a greater sense of uprightness with a lot less work. So, a little something to keep in mind for you. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if you're curious to get a sense of how some of this body stuff can relate to some of the mind stuff a little more clearly, go to bodymindclass.com. I put together a free training for you. It's about 45 minutes in length. It'll walk you through how you can use movement as a metaphor to dissolve some of the self-limiting patterns you might find yourself engaged in day to day. So, if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Would love to hear from you. And thank you again for watching. I know that your time and your attention are your most valuable resources.